I didn't hit record.
All right, I want to hear you talk about me again. It's all about me.
I'm looking forward to asking the same question. My fingers are crossed that Shannon's going to answer it with the same level of care and detail.
Now I'm going to simplify it and be like, oh, I didn't want to do anything.
Let's go. Take two, honestly.
Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe Weekly Podcast. Talking Joe's there. Talking Joe thought we would last. Talking Joe is there. Find each other like a married couple. Our podcast on the air. Talking Joe is there.
Talking Joe is the code name for a completely untrained special podcast force. Its purpose, to produce a regular comic review show while breaking and replacing a series of presenters from across the world.
Talking Joe. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe. We are on our soapbox. Nobody seems to care. Fighting for fandom wherever there's trouble. The podcast on the air. Talking Joe is there. Talking Joe. Talking Joe.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated
Talking Joe is on the air.
I'm also the most professional, because I always remember to hit record the first time round. Today we will be looking at G.I. Joe issue 283 with a very special guest. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce the Sherlock Holmes to my Watson. It's my co-host, a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners and viewers.
Excellent stuff. But we won't go on too long because today we have with us comic book artist and Twiglet aficionado, Shannon SL Gallant. Shannon joined Chief and SJubs back in episode 86 in August 2020, where they discussed the death of Snake Eyes, but mostly snacks. Shannon has penciled more issues of G.I. Joe than any other artist, with over 100 issues to his name across several series. Starting with 2009, G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra movie prequel series, followed by 9 issues or so on Chuck Dixon's G.I. Joe run before starting a long run on Larry Hammer's IDW ARAH run starting in issue 161 in December 2010, which lasted all the way until 245 in 2017, where he took a break for the G.I. Joe vs. $6 Million Man limited series before returning for a standalone issue 263 and back for this issue 283. Whew. And that wraps up the interview. Thank you for your time, Shannon.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Very good to have you. I guess my initial question is, after all of this time, what is it like coming back?
It's just different. No, it's a chance to play with things that you used to work on for a long time and try out things that you want to do and try and make things look different and fresh and not look like the same old crap.
So without getting into who inked the issue, which I think is a big part of how the approach of this issue might be different, what about the storytelling or the penciling is different this time around? Can you pinpoint something?
Well, as you kind of point out, the one thing that is different on this issue is the inking. Originally, when I was doing the series and I was on it for such a long time, I went through, Gary Erskine was the original inker on it, and then Gary left and Brian came in, and Brian and I kind of did the rest of the run together. When Gary was on the book, we would have to have guest pencilers kind of come in and do fill-in issues, and that was always frustrating for me because people would be drawing something and I would have to reference it, but they hadn't finished drawing it yet, and so I was kind of drawing blind, and that was a frustration. And then when Brian came on the book, there was an event in G.I. Joe where they wanted to do like 2 issues a month for like some kind of summer event, and that just kind of highlighted my frustration of having to reference something that hadn't been drawn yet by someone else. And so after that, I decided, I'm just going to double my output when I'm on the book so that I can keep the book coming out on time and I only have to reference myself. And so I went from doing a page a day to 2 pages a day, but I could do that because Brian and I had already been working together for enough time that I could just indicate something on a page and Brian would know what to do with it. He would know how to, ink it in or fill it in or whatever. And so the biggest difference is, when he was on the book, I didn't have to do this fully rendered out thing to kind of get the message across to him as an inker. And this time around, because of how the inking was done, I got to focus more about what the inks would actually look like because I was controlling it more. And it was stuff that I had been playing with on my own on the side because I'm a big Jackson Guys fan. And Butch has a style that's very shadow-oriented, like Michael Lark or, the classic Alex Toth or even the recently passed Jean-Paul Leon. And I love that style. I love that kind of heavy shadow, movie quality. And that's, Larry had written a script that was basically like a movie plot, like a Jason Bourne or a Mission Impossible film. And so I wanted it to feel more like a movie. And to do that, you have to have a more realistic approach to stuff. And I didn't want it to look as cartoony as it had in the past. When I was penciling for Brian, it was a very linear style. I was just keeping the basic information and moving on because we were trying to maintain a schedule. I was trying to keep the book coming out on time, but not have to have a fill-in artist. And because of scheduling and the way Larry turns in scripts, you didn't get a full month all the time to do 20 pages. And so I would do it in 2 weeks. And when I say 2 weeks, I treat my work like a job. I try not to work on the weekends. And so that's Monday through Friday. And so I'd do 2 pages a day, so that's 10, and then the next week another 10. And since it's a 20-page issue, that would be the book.
And would you also try and keep to like a regular working hour as well to that extent? Would you try and do a 9 till 5 and protect your evenings?
Yeah.
Or was that just impossible with deadlines?
Not with Joe because, and I just finished up a Godzilla book, and that it was pressing for me. I mean, it's been a chore. Like this dream project turned into kind of a kaiju problem. But yeah, I try to maintain it like Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Treat it like a job. Take lunch at the same time. Just kind of maintain that schedule. And when I'm working, I kind of check the clock. I'm like, okay, I got to get this panel done. I got to get this done. I got to get, I've never understood the idea that, I'm going to work until 3 a.m. and get up at 6, because that kills you over time. I personally can't maintain that kind of schedule.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of archetypal idea of a suffering artist where
screw that.
You kind of, have to inflict this pain on yourself and end up with back problems, wrist problems.
I've got those.
Okay.
I've earned that. Yeah.
But there's also a difference between the 24-year-old artist who's new to comics, who wants every job to wow the editor and any potential future editor, and the artist who's been working steadily for 5 or 10 years, who has some assurance that they have relationships and connections, right? So.
Well, I don't have any. If you have some, pass them on.
Okay, so what I mean is you have a reputation for quality and reliability. The younger version of you that's just breaking into comics, or the 25-year-old artist who's not you, it's someone else, may work weekends and late because it's like, this is the job that's going to get me noticed by a different editor, and then I'll get the next job or something closer to a dream job.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I think there's still kind of some of that attitude there, but that's, for me, I'm kind of trying to channel that energy into doing something new, doing something fresh. I think that's one of the reasons I love Jackson Guy so much, is if you look at his early work, back when he was on Micronauts or, Swords of the Swashbuckler, or his early days, and, even stuff before that, you wouldn't suspect that's the same artist as what you see in his work now. He's grown completely as an artist, from this young kid starting out to this fully developed, as far as I'm concerned, one of the masters of storytelling. And granted, I'm not putting myself on that level, but that's what I'm aspiring to be, is someone that constantly grows.
The other artists in that sort of similar pantheon of Steve Epting, and comparing his early work in, for example, Avengers versus his run on Captain America, or kind of the level of work that Michael Lark has reached for his work on Lazarus.
Yeah.
These artists started off pretty great to begin with, but have just refined it into almost an entirely different look and just quality.
Well, yeah, and you can look at, I mean, like Brian Hitch does not look anything now like what he did. He went through his whole Alan Davis clone phase, but you look at his stuff now and it's totally different.
I wanted to ask some specifics about the inking here because it is striking how different it looks. Not just the subtlety of you're inking yourself, not one of these other two artists, but the specific approach. I'm seeing a little more detail in small. The opening scene. It's a crowded, dense scene because it takes place in a city and it's a chase, and there are lots of additional extra characters. So I'm seeing in the inking more detail, more lines, and a lot of thin lines. Right. I'm looking at Chuckles' hair. I'm looking at the taxi driver. And so when you mention Jackson Geiss, that does ring a visual bell for me. But I'm also wondering, what do you ink with, and what did you ink with this issue that if you had inked yourself previously, you may not have inked with?
Well, I have the pleasure or the self-torture of actually being in communication with Butch, and Butch will send me pencils and then copies of the inks of his stuff. And I've had the courage or the stupidity to, reverse that and send him what I've done.
What, inking his pencils?
No. Like, I'll send him what I've done.
Okay.
As far as, like, my work. And Butch will, inherently, he'll look at it and go, "Oh, you used a pen, didn't you?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, you used a marker, didn't you?" "Yeah." "You didn't use a brush, did you?" "No." And Butch is, he's a master of the tools, and he'll call you out. Like, he doesn't care. And unfortunately, because of the schedule on this book, I was using pens and markers and trying to just kind of get it out on time, but still kind of capture that look that I wanted it to have. So yeah, most of what I used was kind of like the micron pens for the really fine lines. Mm-hmm. And then I'm a big fan of the kind of like, I think they're the Pentel brush pens. Yeah, and really it's just so you don't end up sitting there spending the time cleaning the brush, inking, dipping it in the ink. It's keep it going. Mm-hmm. When I'm penciling, I used to like to use the old 2mm leads, but I spent half my time sharpening the damn thing. And so to keep the schedule, when I was working with Brian, I switched to just a click pencil, because it's faster. That doesn't sound like much, but over the period of a month or whatever, that time adds up.
Yeah, for sure. Because, I mean, particularly, I guess, when you're working on the smaller scale paper that you often have, that I guess you do need a finer line to be able to fit in that detail once it's, at that scale.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get in detail. I mean, I love the little Easter egg things and to make people feel like it's fully fleshed out. But yeah, I can't do it with a brush. I know Butch can probably like ink a microchip with a brush, but I can't do it.
Do you consider experimenting with inking digitally?
I ink because I also do Beano. When I'm doing Beano, which is the other thing that I do, that's like basically my day gig right now. I ink and color that digitally. Okay. It's okay. I just enjoy the feel of, something in my hand. Even though I'm using a pencil, there's a different feel, like a brush or a pen or pencil to paper than there is pen to tablet surface. Even if you have one of those plastic sheets that's supposed to simulate paper, it never feels the same. There's no give in the tool. Like the Apple Pencil or whatever, there's just no give in it. Even when I was using a Wacom, the pen never responded the way I wanted it to, and it was bulky and you couldn't change it. And I love changing up pencils constantly, just because it helps my hand. You don't end up with that like your.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Just have a
like
different shape in your hand. That
and that's,
you're not kind of locked in that one position.
Yeah, and it's also the diameter of it, and so your hand doesn't get cramped into that one size.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I read that in like one of these like self-help artists, like how to keep yourself healthy as an artist kind of things. And they were talking about people don't think about that, but it does end up affecting your hand just from being at the same size all the time. So
I had a thought just looking at, talking about your approach of inking yourself versus and how you would work with Brian previously, and that opening panel of this issue where there's just, this scene with just so much going on. And I think, a previous, fast approach where you're leaving a lot of room for the inker to pick up the fine detail. I imagine doing a panel like that one would be a harder ask of your inker, where there's just so much detail to fill in the blanks.
I used to pretty much ask Brian to do a lot of detail anyway,
Okay.
and how much of it he kept in or left out, I don't remember specifics of, but a lot of this I would have just simplified down, or left a lot up to Brian. Like the original description in the script was Larry wanted to make sure that there were all these kind of cables to really kind of relate what it's like to be in these Asian countries. The story isn't actually set there, but Larry in the script said, okay, it's basically Bangkok pretending to be this fictional town. And they have...
I did wonder.
Yeah, I mean, it's set in Thailand. And it was down to the point where I want the cabs to look like Thai cabs and so forth. But his big thing was there are always cables. They just have lines everywhere. And so that was one of the things about the drone, was having problems going through, the cabling. So I would have probably just kind of indicated a couple and told Brian, left a little note of like, add more cables. Because that's kind of a last minute detail. You do everything else and then you ruin it by drawing a cable over it. So.
Yeah.
Did you pencil differently, knowing you would be inking yourself? Did you pencil less?
No, I'm horrible at that. I know guys can do that. Like Butch sends me his pencils and I'm like, how the hell did you know what was going on when you went to ink it? He's like, I just know. And but I can't, for some reason my brain doesn't work that way, and I have to put the detail in the pencils so that I know what I'm trying to do. So yeah, it didn't really save me any time on that end.
And I know you've spoken before when you were talking about this, when you were talking to Chief on the last episode, that you have worked at a smaller scale for this issue. Were you back at on a regular comic art board, or were you again sticking to that smaller scale?
I've kind of shifted, not up to like a full 11 by 17 sheet like a lot of most guys are working at. They're working at that kind of, I don't know what the British equivalent is, but I've started using this Japanese paper, and I guess their size and what they call it is a B4, and it's about 11 by 13 or something like that, or whatever. So it's not quite as big as a normal US comic page size paper, but it's not the old 8.5 by 11 that I used to work at for the first part of Joe. So it's slightly larger, but a lot of that has to do with just the paper quality. Like I like this Japanese paper. I just think it's a better paper, and that's the largest it comes in.
When you're on that smaller scale, did that coincide with, you were talking about sort of having to speed up and sort of adapting your approach slightly differently when Brian started as well? Was that all joined together, or did it happen in a slightly different sequence?
No, I was drawing at the smaller size before I was on Joe. Back when I was doing the prequels, we were scanning from pencils, and filling in all the blacks with a pencil was taking forever, and I was too stupid to just kind of fill it in the computer. And so I started drawing at that smaller size so I could render everything out and then scan it, just to save time. Takes less time to fill in 8.5 by 11 than it does to fill in 11 by 14. So that was just a habit I had gotten into then, and what convinced me to do that was I saw some original Travis Charest pages, and his were on 8.5 by 11. And I thought, well, hell, if it's okay for him to do it, it should be okay for me to do it. And so that's when I started that. And I was talking to the late Jeremy Dale, and he goes, "Do your originals sell? Because people don't seem to want to buy the smaller stuff when I do it." And I said, "No, I hadn't really thought about it." And so I started shifting up slightly more for the secondary market thing of selling originals. And they did sell better, so that was another reason I kind of started to move up. But I don't like working huge. I don't feel like I can see the whole page at once. And so that's one of the reasons I like working a little bit smaller. And that's one of the things I don't like working about on the iPad is when I'm drawing, I feel like I still don't get to see the whole page, even though you can reduce it down. When you want to do detail, you zoom in and then you lose everything. There's no peripheral vision of where this part falls on the page. So it's always been a problem for me. I'm nothing but a problem child. So
when did you draw this issue, and how long did it take?
this, I think it was in April, if I remember correctly, or just before April. And I had a little bit longer than normal because I was going to be inking myself. And originally it was just to get the book back on schedule, to help them maintain their schedule. And it wasn't supposed to come out for like another week or something, I don't know. And then suddenly they decided to release it early. I don't know why. But yeah, it's been in the can for a few months.
So how long did you have to draw it, or how long did you take to draw it?
I know I penciled it in my normal rate, which is 2 pages a day. And that was kind of a challenge because of all the referencing in it, from the Thailand end of it. And then the inks, I was trying to do 2 pages a day for the inks, but I think it was coming out to more like 1.5 pages, just because that's not my comfort zone. It's a little harder for me, and especially trying to channel my inner Butch, which, obviously did not happen. Yeah, it just took a little longer because I was very insecure about, okay, if I do this, is it going to look right? And am I going to have to start the whole page over? That kind of thing.
Interesting. Is that a phenomenon that occurs, that you'll get as far as almost completing a page, then just sort of stepping back, looking at it, and going, no, I can do better than that. Let's start again, square one. Or does the deadline just mean that you just can't do that?
Yeah, it's the latter. Usually, if I've screwed up something at the beginning of the page, I'll start over, depending on how far in I am. But yeah, if I get near the end of it and I screw something up, I might do a patch. Just like, okay, I'll just redo this panel, which I think I did 1 or 2 in the book. I did go back and just kind of like decide, no, that didn't look right, and I'm just going to redo this panel and plop it in. But I try not to do that. I try to get it right, or as close as I can the first time. But even in conversations with Butch, we're never happy. You're never going to be happy with anything in the end. He doesn't like anything. I'll send him notes and just be like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And he goes, yeah, it's crap.
Because we're talking about sort of the time to create things, that you hit the monthly deadline for the book for almost the entirety of the run. There were a few sort of fill-in artists during your run. I was just flicking through it and seeing there's a handful of issues from the likes of Ron Wagner, Ron Friends, Sergio Corello and Paolo Villanini. And so it's sort of incredible to have an artist on the book, a mainstream book, for the kind of runs that you have, outside of the likes of Ryan Otley on Invincible, and Charlie Adlard on Walking Dead, and Eric Larson on Savage Dragon. It's not a phenomenon we get to experience too much as comic readers. So that incredible run and consistency is a real gift to us as readers. That was a bit of waffle before. I was going to say sort of the bringing it back to what we were talking about, which was kind of the time that we need that you need to take some of these things. That I think, was it Cobra World Order that was that hitting weekly? And I know that there was the Paolo Villanelli couple of issues, 3 issues in the run up to that. Was which I'm assuming was to give you a bit of a buffer to hit that deadline. But what in that run, what was the quickest that you were able to turn out a single issue, or was asked to turn out a single issue?
Yeah, that was kind of when we decided, or I decided that, I was tired of having people do fill-ins. And so I think back before that, I was only doing about a page a day because that was kind of the expectation of, oh, you're going to do a page a day and then the book will be done within a month.
Yeah.
But then when they decided to do that whole event where there were like multiple issues coming out in a month, we were getting pressed in the idea of like to crank stuff out. And so that was kind of my first foray into doing more than a page a day and realizing, okay, well, the Joe universe is kind of a set universe in the sense of the references are going to be one of these toys, one of these characters. And when you've built up a library of references, you don't need to go outside looking for stuff. And by that point, I had built up this whole library, or at least knew exactly where to go to get the few things that I was missing, to cut down the research time. And which I don't think editors or anybody really thinks about. And that really is a huge chunk of your time, especially if you're referencing something heavily, like in this case it was Thailand. So you spend a lot of time trying to track down all these references. If you're like me, you want it to look a certain way. And for me, if someone goes into, a shop in Thailand, I want it to look like a shop in Thailand, which does not look like the Safeway around the corner from my house. Just that kind of thing. Or like, for example, the cab. When you get into a Thai cab, they're decorated a certain way because that's the culture. And so I wanted it to ring true, and Larry wanted it to ring true. For all the problems I may have had with Larry, the one thing I can say is when you got a script, he told you exactly what he wanted, especially in terms of guns or military equipment. But with this Thai issue, he was very specific. I want cables, running through the city. I want the Thai cabs to have, their charms and ornamentals that they put inside the car. And so you have to look that stuff up. You have to find those references, and it takes a while because, a lot of the time you can type it in English, but you're not going to get the results that you would if you could speak Thai or Chinese or Japanese, which I can't. So it takes a little more time to track down something on somebody's trip blog or wherever you're going to find it.
I think about this every so often, the time it takes to design costumes or settings. And a friend of mine told me that when Chris Anka was drawing Runaways from Marvel, I think this was 4 years ago, there's a scene that takes place in, I forget her name, but it's the youngest member of the Runaways who's technically a mutant. She's the one with she always has like cat ears.
I want to say Molly.
Yes, thank you. There's a scene that takes place in Molly's bedroom, and Anka is a great artist and storyteller and designer, right? Like think of his costume designs for Marvel. So he actually paid an artist, like a designer, to do, I guess it was a schematic of Molly's bedroom, because she's, 10 or 12 in the story. And a 10-year-old or 12-year-old's bedroom in, the suburbs or the city is going to look a certain way. And that's time that he either didn't have to figure that out before then actually drawing the scene there. And, it's like 1 page or 2 pages, or maybe it was recurring. Or maybe he had the time, but as good as a designer as he is, not the expertise. And I think about all of the embedded time and research and brain power that goes into drawing comics. It's like you have to be able to draw horses, buildings, machine guns, and folding clothes, right? Plus like anatomy, acting poses, faces, and hands, right? You have to be able to draw everything and anything. And then on top of that, like, there's like one fight scene in Times Square, and then at the end of the issue, like some new no-name supervillain team shows up, and they're all going to disappear in a panel. But you still have to draw a bunch of costumes. And where the editors are not necessarily building into the schedule, laying all that groundwork. But I remember when the X office in 1995 published The Age of Apocalypse, right? This 4-month event where all the titles changed, all the characters were different, all the costumes were different. And several artists who weren't drawing the books did character designs ahead of time. And some of those made it out in like backup pages or reprints or sketchbook specials. And I think Marvel still does that with some events. But you make a good point about just Googling, downtown Bangkok or taxi interior, and that takes as easy as it is now to Google it rather than to go to the library or collect magazines. Suddenly it's probably a half hour, 2 hours later, you've got, it's like, well, now I can draw this one machine gun, this other machine gun, this one car, but I haven't started the page yet.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because one of the things, it seems like the industry's changed since I started and since, like the early 2000s, when I think everybody was starting to get onto the internet. And I think there's this expectation now, or a demand, an unwritten demand, that everything be hyper accurate. And people will call you out if anything is off. And so you end up spending just as much, if not more, time doing research to try and get all those details correct. Some guys don't care, and I wish I had that luxury of just not giving a crap. But with Joe fans especially, they'll call you out. Like, they'll come up to the table and start chewing you out because you got like one detail wrong on, a tank or whatever their favorite toy was. And it's usually, you can tell whatever their favorite thing was, because that's what they get most upset about.
As a contrast, all of the artists in the 60s and 70s and 80s drawing New York, and it's, Spider-Man swinging through sort of every part of New York looks like every part of New York, and it's just tall buildings, and somewhere you've got the Statue of Liberty or the Empire
Water
State
towers.
Building.
You always have to have a water tower. That was like they're in New York, there's a water tower.
And the artists, the expectation for the artists wasn't the same, and also the readers similarly didn't have the same immediate access to all of the reference, such that some reader in Boise, Idaho could say, wait, that's not what Brooklyn looks like. Brooklyn's different than Manhattan.
Yeah, and they'll do that. Now they'll actually go out of their way to find out if you're wrong. And which is, that's fine. I mean, that's part of the job, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But I think we've lost a little bit of that ability to kind of just immerse ourselves into the story. We get, especially as fans, we tend to get so bogged down and double checking everything they've done. It's almost, there's almost a competition of who can point out the thing that's wrong fastest and soon, the quickest on the internet. So it's almost a deadline rush, like the minute the issue drops, everybody's in a mad dash to find the mistakes. And for me, as a fan, it kind of takes some of the fun out of it. You get so bogged down in that you can't enjoy just what's going on. But then again, I get pissed off when stuff is wrong about the characters I like.
But shifting gears a bit, if that's all right. I was thinking last time you were on the show, you were talking about the death of Snake Eyes, and some of the work that was kind of in the run up to that. Obviously, there was a lot of issues after that point, and it's some very interesting story arcs. One of the, I guess, the legacies sort of following Death of Snake Eyes was then the emergence of the throwdown version of Snake Eyes. I was wondering how you went about that and felt about that, and did you try and approach throwdown in a different way to it just being the same as the regular Snake Eyes?
I'll be honest, I don't know what you're talking about. Because it was because I left the book like not long after Snake left. We introduced, I can't remember her name now.
Dawn.
Yeah, Dawn. And so it was kind of like we put Dawn into the costume, and then that was about when I left. That was when Nathan Diaz took over. And it's one of those things, like I'm done with it, and I walked away from it, and I haven't really looked at hardly any of the Joe books since I left. I did the kind of recap issue where Storm Shadow goes to they go to the monument. But yeah, I just kind of walked away from it. I always wasn't that thrilled with the idea that they killed off Snake Eyes to begin with. And I think I might have discussed this the last time of just, I felt like they lost the only real romance that they had in the book, which was Snake Eyes and Scarlet. And I thought that was kind of a bad idea for a lot of reasons, and one of them was there were fans that only read the book for that. That was the part that they enjoyed the most. But as far as like whatever they did after, Larry's going to do what Larry's going to do. So whether you like it or not, you don't have a lot of say in it.
Sure. Was there anything from that later era that you worked on that sort of stood out as something you particularly enjoyed, or was more of a highlight? So, for example, for me, I enjoyed the introduction of Bomb Strike as a new hero for the book, a sort of a character that had never really been featured before, and then was got a bit of time in the in the limelight.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed her addition or like kind of putting her up more on a pedestal as a character. I enjoyed those issues a lot. I enjoyed when they had was it the Red Skulls?
Mm-hmm. The Red Shadows. Yeah, there was some sort of fun return from then. There was a particular panel that I really enjoyed that didn't make a lot of scientific sense, but absolutely worked in terms of comic art, which was sort of the shadow of the Red Skull looming over Bomb Strike, where the eyes of the skull didn't form a shadow, so there was like light, passing through, and it kind of formed this brilliant kind of shadow silhouette that absolutely worked as art, but sort of maybe less from a scientific point of view of how a shadow would actually be formed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and for me that was kind of one of the things I was always trying to do when I was on the book is make it feel more like an 80s book, or like a late 70s, that era. And I feel like the guys were allowed to take more liberties with reality, in the sense of it was drawn realistically or rendered realistically, but they still played with the reality of things. So they were going more for the design than they were for the reality of the shadow. And so that was kind of harking back to that. And again, I feel like we were talking earlier, I think we've lost a lot of that ability to kind of see the playfulness or the uniqueness of the medium, in that you don't have to necessarily always follow the rules if you're trying to make like a thematic statement of some sort. And covers seem to always be the place they did that the most. It was always that here's this odd shadow cast across the building that you would never actually get, but we're kind of making a statement about what's inside the book or the theme of the book. It was very Will Eisner in, paper's never going to float into a form letters. That's never going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But you see it spell out the spirit, and it makes complete sense because it fits the theme of the book or the feel of the book.
Yeah, and I think comics as a medium allows you to do certain things that don't work as as a film, for example. But you can get away with a particular artistic flair, element, interpretation, or an element of silliness or playfulness that maybe might not fit a kind of more realistic and film interpretation. That you can do certain things and have them work well within the medium. And if you're doing a comic, you should make the most of the fact that it is a comic.
And I especially feel that way about covers. I feel like covers now have just really gotten, I don't know, I wouldn't say lame, but it's always like one central figure standing in the middle of the cover. It's like the movie poster problem. It's like every movie poster is someone standing in the center of the poster from a back shot looking over their shoulder with something in their hand. Yeah, I miss the old covers where you never see word balloons on covers anymore. You never see a scene that's on the cover and you're like, oh, this is going to be great, and then it's never in the book. That kind of thing. But yeah, we just don't let it. We just don't play with it anymore.
We were only talking about that the other day, me and Tim.
The feeling I go back to is my first issue of G.I. Joe is issue 90, where the cover has Road Pig dragging Clutch and Rock and Roll toward the camera down a hallway, and on the wall behind them, next to them, there's a sign with an arrow, and it's pointing to Brainwave Scanner. And I didn't know what that was But looking at this cover, I was immediately worried about the two Joes. I was aware that they were in their civvies. I was struck that it was Road Pig, a character that hadn't been on the show. I think of this thing that the writer Stephen Grant talks about, which is that the cover should ask a question and the interiors should answer it, or generally should try to. And covers can certainly be exaggerations. The whole issue, they're like in disguise. I think I want them in their regular costumes on the cover, that kind of thing. If Snake Eyes isn't in the issue and there's 3 other Joes who are, the cover probably shouldn't be those 3 Joes plus Snake Eyes doing whatever, right? To pump up sales. I also wonder that worry that I had in April or June of 1989, looking at that issue, I wonder how much of that magic is just sort of permanently gone because I'm an older, more experienced reader and, characters die and come back, or no one really dies. So if the cover is making me worry, what's Road Pig doing to these 2 Joes, right? My first Joe story ever, that's a legitimate concern. By the time I've read my 500th Joe story, it's well, he's probably going to lock them up and they'll get away. I think maybe the word is you were saying sort of fun and playful and maybe exaggerated. I think a word for me might be melodramatic, that covers are dramatic or stale. But there's this, a lot of comics and G.I. Joe very much, it's not reality, it's a heightened reality. And, particularly when you have very bold inking and very bold, more flat coloring, I think of, who did the cover for was it the second or the first DC Marvel crossover in the 70s with Superman and Spider-Man on the cover? Is it Jose Luis Garcia Lopez? I can't remember.
Probably.
But everything about that cover, right? Like their pose and whatever the sort of building or spire or construction thing that Spider-Man is on, such that he can be high up in the air with Superman and Superman is flying. Flat colors, right? That cover pops so much. And this might be a segue into talking about the covers of this issue, which is a thing we do here at Talking Joe.
Why not? Yeah.
But thick outlines and fewer bold colors do make a cover pop.
Yeah, the cover, of course, featuring bold images of Al Cobra and Sarawak Sally with the slogan, "Who is Sarawak Sally, and will she stop the threat of the nuclear warhead?" Is not what we got. Okay, let's get on and talk about this issue, shall we?
Yeah.
Comic talk, oh, comic talk. Larry Hama writes them, Tim and Mark discuss them, whoa. Comic talk, oh, comic talk. Larry Hama writes them, Tim and Mark discuss them, whoa.
Okay, so the creative team, writer Larry Hama, artist SL Gallant on pencils and inks, colours Jay Brown, letters Neil Utaki, senior editor Tom Waltz, editor Megan Brown, research specialist Diana Davies. The Sit Rep, Murder by Assassination, Part 3. The Joes were called to Washington, D.C. in order to explain their recent off-the-books operation in Springfield to rescue Snake Eyes. But the secret congressional subcommittee running the show was infiltrated by Cobra after a bloody battle between the Joes and a deadly Cobra operative. The Joes suspect the newest Cobra baddie, Al Cobra, is involved, and a covert team is dispatched to Southeast Asia to hunt him down. ... It's almost like a Star Wars crawl, that one.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
So we've got cover A with art by Andrew Lee Griffiths and colours by Jay Brown. It's a lineup of a lot of the female Joes. We've got Sherlock, Jay, Jinx, Scarlet, Dawn, Covergirl, and Helix sort of gathered around a Wolverine tank. We're just missing probably Bomb Strike. Might be the only obvious exception there, not on the cover. But yeah, a good lineup, and troll baiting as well. If the reaction of some people on the internet is to be believed. Yeah, it's PC gone mad, another issue just with girls in it. It's just the cover, but there we go.
I like this cover a lot. As with 2 episodes ago or 4 episodes ago, I like Andrew Lee Griffith's art. I do think his inking, I think some thicker lines here and there to make characters pop from backgrounds, that would delight me. The missiles coming out of the Wolverine have these red tips, and I don't know if this is a reference to like a re-release or a later version of the Wolverine. My brother had the Wolverine, not me, so I'm doing this from memory, but it's light gray missiles and they don't have a second color on them. So I don't mind the change for its own sake, but what happens with these 12 red tips right behind Dawn, right in front of, or right behind the A Real American Hero subtitle, the cover gets a little busy in that upper third, right below the word G.I. Joe. And I like the sunset, but as I've said in previous cases, I feel like a lot of times Jay Brown's colors, the light is not consistent, and I'm seeing these characters lit sort of from the front, but I feel like the sunset is behind them.
Shannon, any thoughts on the cover?
Well, I hate Andrew, so no, he and I have a running thing about hating each other. But yeah, it's one of those things that goes back to what we were talking about, like the cover doesn't necessarily relate to what's inside. And it's fine because, you never know when you get the assignment what the stories are necessarily going to be about, because Larry writes them a week before you get it. So you do what you got to do.
Yeah, and we should point out that since I own a comic book store, I'm on the other end of this, right? Not just as like an impatient reader, but we look through a catalog and order comics 2 or 3 months ahead of time. And it's not just for our sake that we know roughly what the book's going to be. Like, oh, this cover has these certain characters on it, I'm more excited. Or, oh, this artist drew this cover, I'm more excited, I'll order more, I'll push it more. It's that according to the terms of sale that are agreed upon by the publishers, the distributor, and the retailers, right, the stores, if a book is late, if the contents are significantly different, if the creative team is different, if the cover is different, the book is then returnable in the direct market. Comic book stores can return copies for unsold copies for money back. And the distributor doesn't want to deal with that, and the publisher doesn't want to take the small financial hit, which is why, for decades, right, like books would get rushed. Suddenly there would be 7 inkers finishing a book. There'd be a fill-in artist, right, to just keep the trains running on time, because if a book is late, there are financial consequences. And also, if 12 issues are supposed to come out a year, that's a certain guaranteed cash flow for the publisher. So when we have recently been interviewing some artists who've worked on issues and they've said, oh yeah, I drew this cover long before I drew the issue. I didn't know what the issue was going to be about, or we only had a general sense of what this issue was going to be about. I get the sense from editor Tom Waltz's blurb in the letters page of the previous issue, right, that part 3 of this story is sort of a narrative detour, but he assured us that it was still important and was still part of the story. And I get the sense that in writing the story, right, and making it up as he goes along, Hama gets to the end of chapter 3 and he's starting at the end of chapter 2, and he needs to shift focus back to where Al Cobra has been. And so I don't want to say that I'm assuming like everything changed, but I think, this whole timeline of when the cover has to be in the catalog for the retailers to see it, to know what to order, versus when the issue gets written, when the issue gets drawn. These don't always butt up against each other well.
Well, they especially don't with Larry, because, as I said before, Larry writes, and you mentioned it, Larry writes as he goes along. Like it's almost like a stream of consciousness, just blurting out whatever he's going to do. And one of the weird things about Larry too is he also made a statement at one point where it was, well, I use whatever the cover is to kind of tell me what to write in the story, which I thought was kind of odd, but okay, I guess I get that. And that's just the way Larry is, that's the way he operates. So it is difficult to kind of predict where the story's going to be in the cover when the writer himself doesn't know where he plans on taking it. I do know that Andrew, who did the issue that follows this the story still takes place. They're still part of the story in Thailand, because he was referencing some of the stuff that I had done in the book for his own pages. So there is a continuation there. I mean, it's not like this is one complete standalone. You can read the story as a standalone because it's self-contained and a beginning and an end sort of situation. But the events do play out in other ways in following issues. So to a certain extent, it might be a standalone, and in many other ways, it's not.
And the other thing about this cover, although it's not directly related to the inside, I guess as part of the overall storyline and the introduction of this new character Sherlock, I guess it's kind of a shorthand there is almost saying, look, here's Sherlock, and she's joining this pantheon of classic G.I. Joe female characters that have been introduced over the years, and sort of making a statement there in terms of this character, she's going to be just as good as those other gals, and she's here to stay almost.
Yeah.
Was there any discussion of you being able to do a cover on this issue?
No, when they gave it, Tom told me about doing the script, it was, we don't need a cover, we've already got it. I'm like, okay, fine,
Okay.
because I've done plenty of covers that I obviously was not doing the interiors on, so it's just the way the ball rolls.
I guess they just had them in the bag already. Cover B is it's the part 3 of the jigsaw image there, of the connecting covers by Freddie Williams II, colours by Andrew Dalhouse. This time we've got Scarlet up front, Helix, Law, Flint, I think that's Lowlight, and Jinx. So just continuing that giant scene. This time, focusing in on Joes, and we don't have any Cobras in on this element.
So this cover, I'm holding the comic book, right? I'm not looking at the 5 images together on my screen. And as a panoramic poster, the image is great. This middle slice of it as a cover by itself, I like it. I feel like compositionally it's the weakest, because there's a lot of negative space in the lower half of the cover that, there's some debris, there's this space around Helix, there's this space around Order, there's this space around Scarlet. I think the cropping on Scarlet, the cropping on Jinx, this cover feels like a little bit of a compromise. And I think I said in a previous episode, when you draw a wraparound cover or like a gatefold cover, you every couple of inches you have this sort of vertical zone where like not much interesting is going to happen, because that's where the printer is going to cut or fold. If this was a cover by itself, if Freddie Williams II had drawn sort of this scene with these 6 Joes plus an animal with some of Washington D.C. Behind them, I don't think this cover by itself would get this composition. I think Flint wouldn't be centered right directly above Scarlet. I think Law would be, like bigger and more up. Certainly Jinx wouldn't be kicking and then cropped on the right side. So good drawing, but compositionally, I think it's a compromise.
Mm-hmm. And then the third cover here is the retailer incentive with a returning John Royal, Jagdish Kumar, and colours by James O'Frady. We've got Zarana with a couple of frag vipers up front, and in the background a hiss tank. And it was interesting. I shared with you, Tim, some of the behind the scenes images of this one, which kind of hints at the process that Royal took. He had done some images with this frag viper, sort of playing with the composition of those, with I think either a commission in mind or with a different cover in mind, and then not using them. And then he did a commission for this Zarana figure, and this cover is kind of a patchwork quilt of these different ideas that he'd been playing with, combining the previously unused frag vipers, this sort of pose that was created for a commission, and then them sort of adding in the hiss behind it to create a overall composition for the cover, which again, unfortunately, doesn't relate to the interiors, which is always a little bit of a shame. But a nice image there of Serrano.
It's exciting to see the Frag Vipers. They have difficult to draw helmets, and Royal pulls it off. These very much feel like helmets, like larger things that are on top of a human head. Sometimes in comics or maybe in action figures, we sort of fudge the proportions a little bit. Like the head is smaller than it would be so that the helmet doesn't appear as this overly large thing on it. And these really do look like helmets on human heads here. Interestingly, from the behind-the-scenes process images you shared, Mark, is that seemingly this hiss is traced from a photo of the toy, which cracks me up because, for all of the artists drawing G.I. Joe who are contending with these very specific vehicles in perspective at different angles over several pages, right? One solution is just to trace it. And this doesn't always work because if you photograph a toy, or if you find a photograph of a toy and you like comp it into your composition, however you're like printing that out or drawing it digitally, it can come across as sort of the wrong perspective because the camera lens that you might be using to take a picture of your toy does not accurately replicate the visual perspective of the human eye standing in front of that real tank at 5 feet or 10 feet, where it's like a little bit taller than you. So sometimes this works and sometimes this doesn't. And this does work here, but I saw the cover before I looked at the behind the scenes images you shared, and I thought that the base of the two the gun turret, right, the sort of cylinder next to the Cobra symbol, I thought, this is a good looking hiss. That looks just a little stubby to me. And then the next day, this morning, I looked at this behind the scenes image, and it's just a photo of the toy, and I thought, because that's actually the toy. So I do not fault anyone for tracing photos of G.I. Joe vehicles to make the work go by faster if they can pull it off and sort of crunch it into proper perspective. I do like this cover. I'm okay with Royal's covers mostly not at all reflecting the issues, because that's what we always get. But the cumulative effect of covers A and B and RI are disappointing in that none of them are about this issue. And usually we get one of them, even if it's just like the one character from the issue in front of like a burning Cobra building.
Shannon, over to you. Do you have any particular thoughts on this issue, this cover generally, but also specifically around the approach to how you deal with the thorny issue of trying to get the vehicles looking right, and how you try and accomplish that, and have you used various different set of techniques and found that one works much better than the other? Or well, over to you.
I think it's just a personal preference issue. I generally try not to trace anything, not because I have, kind of like this lofty attitude or anything about it. For me, as Tim was pointing out, things never quite look right when you do that. And I always, I love manga. Like, a lot of what I read is actually just, is not US based stuff. But the one gripe that I do have is you'll be looking at something and everybody's kind of drawn in a certain kind of stylized way, and then you'll get this ultra realistic car or an ultra realistic whatever, helicopter. And it seems out of place because that's basically what they've done, is they've traced a photograph and rendered it out exactly like the photograph. And so it feels like someone's plopped in a photograph. There's a disconnect there. And I try to avoid that, because that's what I don't like when I do it, when I trace something in the past that I've had those situations. I've never liked the way it looks. It may be more accurate to the actual thing, but it doesn't feel right. So I may take a photograph. I only have a couple of Joe toys, and his tank is one of them, because I ended up drawing it so much. And so I may take a photograph of kind of the angle that I'm looking for, But then I just use that as a reference, you know. It's instead of trying to hold the tank, which my hand's going to get tired over time, I'll take a photograph. But I just prefer it to look like it was drawn in the same environment, the same way as everything else on the page. And so I'll go through and my photograph will end up not being exactly what the drawing is, but I feel like the drawing fits together better just because I've built it on the page as opposed to tracing the photograph.
And I don't know the timeline of when 3D Joes was created and you know, filled out with all of the wonderful things that it's got on it, but I imagine it was probably after you had started on the book.
I used it a lot, so I know it was around for a long time. I mean, through a lot of my run, it was there because the thing is you know, I don't own all the toys. 3D Joe allowed me to see what the back of the toy looked like.
Yeah.
In a lot of instances, you find references online. It's all like, you know, the character sitting on the card.
Exactly. Which, you know, as a website, what an incredible gift to anyone that has to draw G.I. Joe vehicles and even characters from different angles to be able to know what's where.
I drew Transformers fan fiction in middle school and high school, and I had the comics that had been published of all the character profiles, and it's all front views.
Yeah.
And I would like sometimes pull out a VHS tape and just hope. It's like, oh, well, there's one of the aerial bots, and I can see the back of his head and the back of his shoulders and the back of his torso, but not his waist or legs.
Yeah. It's really frustrating. So yeah, those sites are really helpful.
Cool. Let's get on to find out what happened in the issue via the plot breakdown. In the Republic of Panchang, a team of Joes are on the trail of El Cobra. Chuckles, Roadblock, and the new Joe, Techie Black Hat, are in the support van, while Lady J and the second new Joe, Multo, are undercover in a taxi en route to a weapons deal sting. Things don't go smoothly as the support team has their tracking drone taken out, gets their comms jammed, they lose sight of the Joes and the taxi before getting involved in a firefight with locals. At the weapons deal, Al Cobra ordered his goons to shoot Jay and Multo, but they go full John Wick in return. Zandar Zarana, Sarawak Sally and her Pirate River crew enter the fray in a thunder machine and steal the nuclear warhead while Al Cobra makes a getaway. The Joes chase them to the Sarawak Star and reach a friendly compromise. Neither side wants to see a rogue nuke in the area, so they disarm it and dump it in the Mariana Trench, and then have sexy cocktail time as they sail into the sunset.
So my overall reaction to this issue is awesome.
I was going to say, you better watch yourself.
I like this. I like chapters 1 and 2 of this story so far, and I was
But 3 is your favorite, right?
Yeah, actually.
And it will remain your favorite, right?
Nothing that happens in chapters 4 or 5 could ever top this.
Yes. Very well said.
But, you know, I was apprehensive because chapter 3 looks like it's a big geographic and narrative shift. I'm perfectly willing for this, you know, like globe-spanning organization and the globe-spanning organization they fight to go all over the place. And certainly there are different moving parts in this story with, you know, a new Joe and then a mystery villain. I mean, it also helped that editor Tom Waltz at the end of last issue said, "Hey, everyone, next issue, don't worry." But the first panel...
Don't worry.
That's not what he said. In the first panel of this issue, I see a convincing and well-drawn traffic jam. I see this expositional... In the first panel, this expositional dialogue that I have for decades now come to know and expect and love from a G.I. Joe script, right? Like, I've got the drone hovering directly over the taxi and getting good visuals. Are we getting clear audio, Black Hat? Right? And it's... I think people who like a certain flavor of more modern comics find this kind of dialogue a little old-fashioned or very, very hokey and terrible. And I find it... I think old-fashioned sometimes is a negative, and I just find it helpful and smart because, yes, I don't know that if you've been in this yellow SUV for like an hour with your two like teammates. Like I'm not saying Mark and Shannon over and over while I'm talking, right, Mark? Right, Shannon? It's like it's just the three of us. We know who's talking. But this is the first page of a story. We've got a geographic and temporal jump. This issue may be someone's first issue of G.I. Joe. And I appreciate that every character gets called out by name early in the issue or in any issue of G.I. Joe or sort of the beginning of their scene, that the dialogue is reinforcing the visuals but not doing any of the heavy lifting, right? Like it's helpful because I see a drone and I thought, oh, is this a drone? Because in whatever the city of Bangkok, like everyone has drones and they're just over traffic, or is this part of the story? It's probably part of the story, but I'm not sure. First word balloon, it's part of the story. It's also exciting to meet a new Joe right on the first page. I'm a little sad that all the Joes in this issue are in civilian clothes because I want Joes to be in their costumes because their costumes are awesome. And I very much wish that somehow we could see Black Hat and Multo in their Joe uniforms, but I get the sense that those weren't invented for this story. So maybe in the future.
I like the idea that you're disappointed that Chuckles isn't in his uniform because he's wearing a blue shirt rather than
of course,
white.
I stand corrected. Chuckles is in his uniform, and it is. I believe this is the same floral print that Jay Brown used for Chuckles. 60, 80 issues ago when Shannon last drew the character. There's a great sense of vehicular character and prop choreography in this issue, both in this opening scene, but also in Act 2 and in Act 3. And the mystery of Al Cobra deepens because he's sitting next to a nuclear warhead for one scene. So he continues to be a mystery, but also
irresponsible.
Dangerous. Is he? Because he pulls out his machine gun and starts shooting. Maybe it's the Joes who are irresponsible for shooting in the direction of the warhead. There's a lot of physical movement within this issue, right? There's a chase. The vehicle being chased disappears. The Joes have to be smart and figure out where it went. They have to help, not quite rescue, but back up their friends. Some bad guys we haven't seen in a long time show up. Some non-player characters from seemingly Special Missions 4 from 1987, right? Am I getting this footnote correct?
That's right, 1987.
Show up, and I love Special Missions 4. I love it, and I have not reread it in a couple years, so I had to take that footnote on faith because I was not going to run upstairs midway through the issue and double check. And then the ending is, we'll talk about the final panel later, but this issue has it all except for Joes in costume, right? New Joes, obscure Cobra, supporting characters we haven't seen in a while, a new fictional Joe country, right, that we can add to this list of Larry Hama fictional countries and cities. Great action, bad guys you love to hate, Joes helping out Joes. Lots of great sound effects. I'm liking the sound effects in the script and also Neil Iwatake's treatment of them. This issue was awesome. And sorry, I feel like we covered this in the first half hour, but great art. I like the penciling. I like the inking. Shannon's storytelling has always been, for this book, a chef's kiss of clarity and heightening tension where tension needs to be exciting action, but also character moments, right? Like Shannon's acting, facial expressions, right? Like body poses, underrated. There's so many pages here, and I'm going to talk about two of them where, like, specifically what the Joes are doing with their bodies. Great.
That makes it sound dirty.
I saw you, Shannon. I saw you came off mute a couple of times. Was there something that you wanted to interject?
No, I was just going to tell them, keep going. Praise me, keep going.
I was delighted by the art in this issue, and I think when you're doing such a long run on the book as you did, it's very easy for that to fall into the background and maybe be a little bit underappreciated. But yeah, it's I think it's a great look for the G.I. Joe world, and you've always been excellent at storytelling and the clarity of the story, telling the story that needs to be told. And this issue, particularly as it's the freshest in my mind, does look completely on point. Should we talk about the new Joes? So we've got two new Joes being introduced here. Black Hat, who is the female kind of hacker, as is shorthand, and from the first Joe that we've got from the Philippines, called Multo, which means ghost in Tagalog, and I believe his introduction was directly a result of Larry Hammer's interview with Glenmark Flash Antonio, who's from a massive G.I. Joe fan from the Philippines, and asked Larry why don't we have a Joe from the Philippines yet? And the equation was, you've asked me, sounds like a good idea, let's do it. I think it was the equation. So Shannon, do you want to tell us about your part in the creation of these two new characters?
Yeah, I mean, all I can tell you is that I was told that there were going to be two new characters, and then given brief descriptions of who the characters were, basically a little bit of their background, and then specifically what their nationalities were going to be. And that's pretty much all I had to go on. I didn't know so much if they were actually members of Joe, or if they were kind of like people that had been recruited from outside to help on this mission, that kind of thing. I really wasn't aware of where they were going to fall, if they're going to end up being permanent members or not.
I was going to say that's an interesting point, and it might not even be spelled out in complete black and white in this issue. But at the time of recording, I think it is issue 287 has had a little bit of information revealed from it, which is the second of the Spotlight arc, where there's this arc is going to focus in on particular characters, and this issue is going to focus in on the new Joes as they're introduced to the sort of the pit for the first time. So it's going to feature Sherlock, Black Hat, and Multo. So it sounds like they're going to be proper Joes and around to stay.
Excellent. Yeah. I figure half the time it's how well do they get received by the fans.
Yeah.
But when I was designing them, I wasn't designing Joe costumes per se, especially because they were just supposed to be in civvies anyway. So I really just kind of designed characters. And Larry gave certain descriptions of what they were supposed to be wearing anyway, specifically with her, because he wanted it to be obvious that she was kind of like this Trek fan, like she was, into sci-fi stuff. So she's wearing like a little Vulcan pendant. I don't know if it's visual, really, like, obvious in any of the panels, but it's that whole, I can't remember the name of it, but it was, when they've achieved pure essence or whatever of logic, they get the little amulet in Star Trek. So it was a copy of that, it was like a cosplay kind of thing, or, a fan thing. So it was little details like that I was trying to throw in just to help define who they were as characters. I will say that Multo, I designed this whole, and I think they're online now.
Yeah.
I designed this kind of more military-looking outfit for him, where it was kind of like, my old jacket from when I was in the service, or an old pair of pants from the service, and then he ends up wearing cargo shorts and a Panama shirt or whatever it was. So it was kind of a waste of time. But
well, Thailand's as hot as hell.
Yes.
In the summertime, so
and so
I can
so
understand
yeah, so
putting him in shorts.
Yeah, it's more of like settling in your head how you're going to approach the character, because I think also the way someone dresses kind of defines who they are as a person. How flamboyant are they, or if this guy's ex-secret service or whatever, he's not going to dress in a way that's going to attract attention. It's going to be muted colors. He's not going to be wearing pink and fuchsia or whatever. He's going to try and blend in with the background. And if she's a girl that's more interested in tech than she is in being on Instagram, as far as like an influencer, then she's going to dress a certain way. So that was the approach. And then the other thing was I always assign actors in my head as to what these characters are going to look like, just so I can have kind of a thing to aim for, so that they do have a uniqueness, like a specific personality or look to them. And so then that's what, part of it is picking out who I'm going to base these people on, just so that they have a ring of truth to them.
Okay, and are you able to let us in on that little secret? Who did you have in mind for these two?
Well, the Indian girl, the first person that came to mind for me was the young lady that was on the recent seasons of Doctor Who. What was her name? Like Mandip Gill?
I've not been following the recent Doctor Who, so I'm afraid I can't.
But anyway, so
brain box.
Yeah, so that I based it on her, and then the Multo is actually based on an actual Filipino actor who was in a show about special agents or special forces kind of characters, and his name was Rocco Nacino or something like that. And again, it's not I'm not trying to necessarily get a likeness in every panel, because I'm not trying to use the actor to that extent, but it is kind of a reference point. To me, it's almost like using a His Tank toy as a reference. I'm still going to extend the barrels of the guns and make it a little more, realistic. But it's a starting point, just so that there's a consistency.
And you're making me think now about who else you might have had in mind for some of the other characters over the years. Like Chuckles, you draw him in with a certain look. Maybe, is it Owen Wilson? Or?
Yep.
Yeah, ding, ding, ding.
Because it's funny, because I was telling Andrew about it, and he goes, well, who's it based on? And I told him, I go, he's kind of like Owen Wilson. He's got a name that implies he's going to be funny, but he's not. And so then other characters are based, he was asking me who other characters are based on, and I changed it up occasionally. Like someone called me out one time and said, your Hawk is different now. And I go, well, yeah, I changed it from one actor to another actor. So that's why it doesn't look the same now. I recast, They wanted too much money. I'm trying to think of who I based him on originally, but at some point it ends up being John Wayne.
All right. John Wayne, wow.
But that's just kind of how I approach it. Like, some characters, I know it's going to be this one. Like, Stalker is Carl Weathers from the Rocky film,
Okay.
Predator. It's always been him. That's what it was. At one point, Hawk was Schwarzenegger.
Oh, wow.
Because it was kind of that... No, not Hawk. Duke. Because of the hair. I was like, oh, it's like Schwarzenegger's hair from Predator or whatever. So it's like, oh, I'm just going to draw Schwarzenegger. And it's not necessarily always the build. It's more the facial features or something. So yeah, I just kind of play with it.
And then, talking about the new Joes specifically, and I called it out as being that Multo was going full on John Wick in terms of that scene where Al Cobra decides that actually he would rather not sell his nuclear device. He would just keep it and also keep the money and do away with the Joes. That's a cool action sequence. Was that one fun to draw?
They're always hard to draw. Action sequences are not my forte. It's not my specialty. It's not the thing that I excel at. So it's always a challenge for me. And so I end up spending most of my time trying to make sure that if this person's here and that person's there and they move here, I spend way more time doing that than I think some people do, because they're not that worried about it. But yeah, it drives me nuts, because sometimes Larry will write something and I'm like, well, okay, if the guy comes in on that side, how does the car work out? And because I had that problem with the van doors, when the guys show up to save everybody and they just kind of drive through the building and they don't really stop. The way cars are flipped in the Philippines, I had the guys on the wrong side of the vehicle. They wouldn't have been able to get in the side door, which is what Larry had written into the script. And so I was like, okay, well, the back door will open, like the hatchback kind of thing on the truck. And so that's why they end up jumping into the back of the truck as opposed to in from the side door. It was a staging issue. I was like, that's the only way it'll work. So, but yeah, that's the stuff I spend half my time pulling my hair out over, and I don't have a lot left.
Yeah, speaking about the full-on John Wick, it is a relatively violent issue for G.I. Joe, and particularly that scene sort of that sticks out is that cool moment where Roadblock is shooting. He's stopped and they're going to do away with the Joes in the van. They said, look here, that's in a van full of Farangs. crud. Just shoot them. And then Roadblock lets loose with the Marjuice through the side of the vehicle, which is a particularly cool touch. But yeah, brutal.
I'll jump in here. Jay Brown does one or two things. He does two things with colors in this issue that I like, and one or two things that I don't. In this panel you just referred to, Mark, the camera's low. We're looking past the yellow van, and these two bad guys are falling over, being shot up. And there's a sound effect as the bullets come out of the van, rat-a-tat-tat-tat. And they're knocked out in red. And there's still some difference, their sleeves or their shirt, their skin, their pants. It's not a uniform red, but it's still a knockout. And then the background is just a very simple sort of circular gradient from an orange-yellow to a similar red. And that both accentuates the violence because the color treatment is different for this one panel, this one moment. It also minimizes the violence because there's less detail if there's less contrast in the blood coming out of these guys as they get shot up if just everything about them is red. And Brown does this again a couple pages later when the Thunder Machine crashes into I guess it's a warehouse or a garage, and shoots up more of the bad guys. So there's a panel where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these bad guys are all getting shot up, and they're all knocked out similarly in this sort of dirty red brown. Something else that Jay Brown does with color that I find interesting, and it's very different, but it's subtle. In the second half of the issue, there are a handful of panels where he doesn't soften hard edges where one color meets another color. This is on Chuckles' face. This is on Zandar's face in one panel. And the page, which is the second to last page of the story, right? There's this standoff where the Joes are on one side and Zandar's Arana and his NPCs are on the other side. There are these two panels of Chuckles holding his gun. There's no way we let you and Sarawak Sally sail off with an operational nuke. And then at the bottom, okay, so where do we go from here? These two panels in particular, when I turned to this page, I thought to myself, did Jay Brown not color this page? Like, did he run out of time and someone else colored this page? Or did someone else finish this page and he started it? Or did he run out of time and not quite finish it to a style that fits his sort of normal monthly style? Because he doesn't use a lot of hard edges. And Chuckles here, there are only two colors on his face and his arms. There's just the complexion and the shade color. And that's not how Jay Brown colors. He normally has like a gradient and then adds like a lot of red brown or some like purple. And I really like these two panels. And where I think he at times overdoes it on this book, I wish more of the book looked like these two panels. And then the other thing that in his coloring doesn't work for me, the page that has the footnote for Sarawak Sally going back to Special Missions 4, right? We see the Thunder Machine in a big panel in the middle of the page, and we see Zandar for the first time, and three of these other characters on the Thunder Machine. And Shannon has drawn some lines in perspective to show what the road is doing with the dotted white line and what the sort of speed lines around the Thunder Machine are doing. And the colors, which are sort of, I think, for the road, but also maybe sort of just for like whooshing speed lines. The sort of diagonal lines of gray and dark gray and light gray in the background of this panel do not at all match the perspective. And so on the top left of this panel, it sort of looks like shafts of light, but I think it's supposed to be the road below and behind them. But going back to those two knockouts, all that red, I like a simpler color treatment in almost all of my comic, right? If I'm reading a new X-Men comic, right, and Marvel's paying top dollar for some really talented like painters who use Photoshop, I'm all in on very aggressive, shiny, pretty, aggressive coloring. But most other books, I'd be happy if it was just like a 1985 palette of 64 colors. And when Jay Brown knocks out a panel in all red because a bunch of guys are getting shot up, I see a small connection to that older style of coloring, and I like it.
Well, it's funny because, I hadn't really kind of paid attention, but when Tim was talking about the introduction scene with the Thunder Machine and everybody, Jim indicated, like, markings on the road, and I had no intention of that. It's funny because it was just, I really just threw in a bunch of speed lines, figuring it was just going to kind of like, I was expecting her to be saying stuff, because I never get dialogue from Larry, usually. So I figured they were going to be screaming stuff at the Joes as they were driving by, suck on it or whatever. And so I was just kind of leaving room for word balloons, and I was like, well, instead of rendering out this whole background that's going to be covered in word balloons, I'm just going to indicate speed lines. And somewhere along the line, James decided it was the road in the background. So yeah, that's like one random white stripe to indicate the center of the road that's not actually there. So that's on me. That's my fault. But yeah, it was basically just a floating vehicle in my original drawing. So sorry.
So yeah, we have the reintroduction of Sarawak Sally, last seen in Special Missions 4 in 1987. That's the one with the cool cover of Lifeline hanging upside down in parachute rigging, with a slightly more updated look to her back then. Sort of a bit more of a punky 1987 look. So you've obviously contemporized it a little bit, Shannon.
Yeah, we had to do that. Can't really draw a hooch. So yeah, so we tried it, and Larry also pointed out in the script that he wanted her to have more of like, as if she had moved on. She wasn't just kind of this street urchin kind of background or whatever, that she had gone semi-legitimate, and so she had a business on the side, and it was a successful business. And I actually ended up modeling her on an actual entrepreneur in Bangkok, like a woman who's been very successful. And so I modeled her clothes on that lady, and slightly the facial features as well, just to make her look a little more specific to that area. But yeah, she's supposed to look like she's gone a little bit more legit, even though she's riding around on the Thunder Machine.
That aside, yeah. But yeah, apart from the Thunder Machine, that giant car with the Gatling guns on the front, apart from that, straight up legit.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what prompted Larry to necessarily bring back Sarawak Sally. If there was something that went on that reminded him of this character that hasn't been seen since 1987. Maybe it's just the scene that was being, the part of the world that this is set, and he was sort of racking his brain to try and remember, which character from the Joe world might fit in. But there was an interesting parallel between that story and this one. So that story from Special Missions 4 was all about the Joes and October Guard fighting over these black boxes, and they kind of reach an impasse, and Sally decides that let's get rid of all of that conflict and just dump them in the river, and then you've got nothing left to fight over. And there's a parallel then to what happens here, where everyone's fighting over the nuclear warhead. What can we do? Disarm it and dump it in the ocean. So interesting parallel there to her previous appearance, and her tried and tested method of dealing with a problem. Dump it in the ocean or a large body of water, I think.
Let's talk about sound effects.
Okay.
There are more sound effects in this issue. This is not a scientific survey. There are more sound effects in this issue than in many issues for a while. And I love sound effects in comics because it's one of the tools in your toolkit. And in the late 80s, after books like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, and maybe even indirectly to a lesser extent, Mouse, I think a lot of editors or writers in comics decided that sound effects looked juvenile and stopped using them in stories. And certainly in like the 1989 Batman movie adaptation drawn by Jerry Ordway, right? Like it's meant to be like a fancier kind of comic, and it's not a regular Batman comic. It's like capturing the magic of that movie, and with actor likenesses and very fancy color. It's some like early Steve Oliff computer coloring. That comic has no sound effects, right? And that's fine. But for like 15 years, Marvel and DC books basically didn't have sound effects, which is really unfortunate because, for example, this page, 2 pages I'm looking at, right, where the Thunder Machine does show up. We've got this footnote to Special Missions 4. Cobra kicks his table over, and then a bunch of his guys as backup run into the garage, right? Vroom, rat-a-tat, blam, brap, brap, rap, blam, blam, right? You might look at these and think, well, these are silly, like 1966 Batman TV, like bam, biff, poff. But these are all descriptive, right? So like the sound of one kind of automobile going faster than another, that's going to have a different onomatopoeia. And what Neil Iwatake does really nicely here with the lettering in this whole issue is subtly he crops a lot of these sound effects right at the panel border. So on these 2 pages I'm referring to, the vroom, right, the bottom of the O's and the M as this yellow van's chasing the Thunder Machine lines up with the bottom of gets cropped by the bottom of the panel, right? Similarly, the gun sound effects on the next page, right? So you can make a small design choice so that these do feel like they belong in the scene rather than as like computer lettering, they just float on top of it. But also, again, like a pistol makes a different sound effect than one kind of machine gun or another kind of machine gun. And I think Hama is paying attention to these different things that make sound effects and using these sound effects to accentuate that for clarity for the reader, right? Like, oh, I see different guns. Oh, I quote hear different guns. And also to add some pep and flavor to the story, like I've got a cupcake with frosting. Well, it also has sprinkles on it, right? The sprinkles don't really change the flavor of the cupcake, but they change your experience of the cupcake because you've got this enhancement, this decoration, and it changes the texture of the cupcake.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about specifically the guns, what's interesting is you've got some shotguns and pistols, they go blam. You've got then machine guns that go brap. You've got the Thunder Machine, which goes brrrr. And you've got a particularly large machine gun that Al Cobra uses that goes rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat, like that. So that's used pretty consistently throughout the whole issue. I'm completely blind to it until you pointed it out. But
and then on the 2 pages after the ones I've just referred to, right? What is the sound of a Thunder Machine knocking into a 4-door sedan? Patang! What is the sound effect of a Thunder Machine hitting a metal barrel and knocking a nuclear warhead onto its front? Clonk! What is the sound effect of the Thunder Machine breaking through a corrugated metal garage wall or door? Kerrang! Right? That's awesome. It's not kiddie or juvenile or dumb or silly. And also, Neil Iwatake is making great letter forms with like warping and stretching these letters, angling the letters in little bits of perspective. The lettering in this issue is great. And in our Disavowed series, I was really hard on the early Devil's Due issues of G.I. Joe from 2001, where the word balloons were like not well populated and shaped. And I can't remember, but I don't think there are any sound effects in those comics, right? Which just sort of follows up on this idea of like, well, for 15 years, Marvel and DC, and I think a lot of Image, just dropped sound effects. But the sound effects add a lot to this issue, and I love them.
Very good. There certainly were a few sound effects in Devil's Due, but maybe less sparingly. Do you remember the lightning and a sploosh as someone falls overboard and that kind of thing? But
okay, thank you for the fact. Thank you for the fact check.
Fact checking, Joe, reporting in.
I want to point out 2 things about the art.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so I'm reading the issue last night, and all of a sudden at the end, the Joes and Sarawak Sally and these 2 Dreadnoks are suddenly dealing with this nuclear warhead, and they're gonna they're going to dump it in the ocean. And I thought, where did this giant container ship come from? And in looking back at the issue, right, so I'm flipping back a page or two, the scene where the Thunder Machine stops because they have run into the local junta, like the local military, right? There's a roadblock set up, and in the background are several shipping containers and this maroon lattice work, which is this like the whole loading gantry at a port city. And it's in the first panel of this page, right, where the Thunder Machine's driving into an opening in a chain link fence. And on the left side, there's a sign that says Pier 17 or 7. And on the right, you see this giant, metal shipping container loading stuff. You see it in the fourth panel. The story is keeping track of these things, and the art is keeping track of these things. And one of the things that I like about Shannon's storytelling, and I think some of this comes from the plot, and some of this comes from Shannon being conscientious about continuity and also careful with acting, is many times in Shannon's art, characters are doing two things at once, which I think is a really good use of comics, right? Because comics are not film or animation, right? One panel of comics can have a lot of information, right? And if someone is saying something in a word balloon, there's this compression of time where we see a frozen moment like a photograph. So it feels like it can only be a fraction of a second. And yet what someone is saying is like 10 seconds or 20 seconds of dialogue, but maybe they're also like kicking and also like, picking up something with their hand. So page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the Joes, the three Joes in the van, the yellow van, are driving. Chuckles, we're looking into the front of the car from the van from the middle, right? And Chuckles is turning back to us and saying, "Let's get a move on, people." And Roadblock has gone from the passenger seat, and he's now rushing into the back to get his giant rifle, which is in this panel. And we see Black Hat's hand near her keyboard or her control panel, right? Because she's just said, "I've got a beat on the transponder. It's on an ultra frequency. Roadblock, I need you back here to help me trace it," right? So there's this urgency, and there's this very small bit of choreography where Roadblock actually goes from the front of the car to the back of the car, right? And if you all want a contrast, please go to my blog back from a couple months ago and read my review of Snake Eyes Dead Game issue number 1, where the writer-artist of that story doesn't keep great track of 3 or 4 Joes in a hallway with a doorway, where like I can't sort of follow who's who and where's where. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages later, it's the page where El Cobra is kicking the table over, right? So he's shooting up the taxi, and there's a big rat-a-tat-a-tat on this first panel. So on this page, he's kicking over the table. So he has both grabbed his giant machine gun and also he's kicking over the table, right? So two things at once. His cell phone, his burner phone, is falling because it was on top of the table. And if you don't believe me, flip back a couple pages. When we first are introduced to him in this comic, right, and Multo is opening up the case of cash, right? What's on the table in front of El Cobra? His burner phone and his machine gun, and also a grenade. So the panel where he's kicking the table over and the phone is falling and he's using his machine gun, right? So then look in the very top right of this page, the very top right of this first panel. Multo is holding 2 machine guns, right? He's picked up one and he's picked up a second, right? Lady J is running around in Western cars, what we'd call the passenger side of the car. And then in the second panel, she now has one of those 2 machine guns, right? So off panel, Multo like tosses her one of these machine guns. Then in panel 3, El Cobra's doing 3 things at once. He's taking cover behind this table. He's firing his machine gun. He's also holding the burner and he's calling, "Where's my backup crew? I need you in the warehouse," right? The next panel, Multo calls out this steel-plated table, right? Which in The next page, by the way, gives us some wonderful sound effects. Punk, 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 punk. The sounds of bullets hitting a bulletproof table. But in the final panel of this page, where he's kicking the table over, right, his backup runs into this garage, right? And one of them, who's saying, "We got your message," is both firing a pistol and also holding his own burner phone up in the air. And this is a thing that happens in G.I. Joe comics, which I've talked about before that I like, which doesn't really happen in other comics. This is a thing that I think Hama writes into his stories, like keeping track of equipment and where people are, and then the artist has to contend with making it work. But, again, like, Punisher comics aren't that different from G.I. Joe comics. It's street level, right? Like, Punisher doesn't have, like, jetpacks. He doesn't fly. He doesn't have I-beams. And he has weapons and a weapons van. But, like, in a lot of Punisher comics, I don't see this kind of sort of prop and object and spatial consideration. And I certainly don't see it in X-Men comics, where they're like, how do we get to Wakanda? It's like, well, we'll take the Blackbird or we'll teleport. There aren't other comics like this, like G.I. Joe, Real American Hero. And I don't mean like, well, it's this nostalgic thing. Oh, it's closing in on 300 issues, or it's got a big cast. It's based on a toy. It's from the 80s. I don't mean that. Other comics don't have action choreography and character work like this. And even if something about the characters or the art or the color or the plot, right, is like not sort of what you love about G.I. Joe. It doesn't compare to your like favorite version or era of G.I. Joe. Part of why I keep reading this comic is that as a reader, I get stuff from this series that I don't get in other comics.
Speaking to your point about sort of keeping track of kit and all that kind of stuff, what I noticed was that there's some very specific weaponry that's being used, and you can see it in the sound effects that we saw as well, the different sounds of the different weaponry, like the guns that are being held in the air by the river pirates, and this very specific gun that Lady J is handed by Multo, and with the magazine, the circular magazine on the top of the gun, and I imagine there's a storytelling logic there that's been thought out by Larry, and I bet you it's the make of all of these very specific guns. It would have been in the script there for Shannon to make sure that he's referencing the right one. And I'm guessing the thought process is that some of this weaponry is maybe leftover stock from various wars, conflicts in the territories. What would be accessible by river pirates or by street gangs in the region would make sense from that perspective. It's not going to be the latest military hardware that would otherwise be used by for example by the Joes or Cobra.
And that's a lot of what Larry does. Like I was saying earlier, I may have issues with some of the stuff of dealing with Larry, but he was always very accurate as far as picking out weapons that he felt, as you were saying, I think most of these are actually like Soviet era type of weapons that were just kind of left scattered about. And he's very particular about that. And he's also got this attitude, and Chuck Dixon was this way as well. When I was doing the reboot of Joe with Chuck, he was very adamant about, okay, this is Cobra. They've got money. They're going to buy these type of weapons. They're not going to run around with like crappy AK-47s or whatever. That's his mentality. It's another problem. Like we were talking about earlier with the clothes. It fits who these characters are. It establishes instantly what level they're at financially, or where they're coming from, or who they are as people. And that's kind of the whole pirate thing. They're going to just have secondhand stuff. Stuff that they've picked up or stolen or found or whatever in their journeys. They're not going to like go down to the, Virginia gun shop and buy whatever top of the line FN-90 submachine gun that they want to buy. It's kind of what's available. And Larry's always been very specific with that kind of stuff. When Natho took over the book, he asked me, what do I need to be aware of working on this? I was like, if Larry says a specific gun, you better damn well use that specific gun, because you're going to get hell for it. And, because he said, I'm getting all these revisions. And I said, is it on military hardware? He's like, well, yeah. That's Larry's sticking point. If he puts in a specific weapon, that's what he wants.
Okay. Next thing on my list that I noticed, we've got the return of Zorana, but specifically Zandar, the Dreadnought twins team. I haven't really seen too much of Zandar really since his first appearance, as far as I can recall in the Hammer use of him. He sort of appeared in the background here and there, but for the most part relegated to the side. And yeah, in the background, I know that there are some big fans of the character who have been lobbying for his return. So I think this issue is probably in part sort of trying to satiate that desire to have him appear.
I'm trying to remember if he the Dreadnoks have that scene where they're gathering in the sort of beginning of Snake Hunt. I'm trying to remember if he's
Yeah. I think he did crop up in Snake Hunts, but not in any
When I read this issue
way.
last night, I thought, oh well, now we know that Alcabra's not Zandar.
That's right. I had the same thought. That cuts down the short
I didn't
list.
really think it was going to be him, but you can't help but go through a list of individual Cobra characters who we haven't seen in a while, or who might have a new prominence if you decide that they should have a new prominence. And there's some funny synchronicity here, because in our other episodes we're rereading the Devil's Due Press G.I. Joe series from 2001, and the issues we just covered, Zandar is suddenly important. So this issue echoed with that, even though that was all coincidental.
Yeah, even though it was almost an issue 20 years ago, it just happens to
Yes,
synchronize.
I might as well have
nicely.
just said, I watched the scene in the animated movie where Zandar has one line. How exciting for Zandar to have such a moment for me. It doesn't have anything to do with anything.
Well, I mean, it's the podcast that was released before this one, so listeners will get the point. Oh yeah, and in terms of the mystery of Alcabra, who it might be, if it isn't a brand new original character and it might be someone existing already, I don't think I'm any closer to what that might be. It's still masked. It's still much the same outfit that he was in his first appearance. He likes big guns. He's pretty merciless. He operates independently and builds up his own teams. Top of the short list, probably still Firefly, if that were the case. I don't know if your thinking has evolved, Tim.
My two questions were the page where he first shows up in this issue. There's where we first see the nuke. Right? It's all the way on the right side, and then at the bottom, it's a dividing compositional element between Multo and him.
Yeah.
That third panel where he's pointing his finger and he's saying, "All I care about is whether you have the money." I sort of wondered, is that a real nose, or is Shannon? I'm so sorry. I don't mean this to be a criticism of your inking. Or like me calling out a guy who's got like a prominent nose, if he's actually got a prominent nose. But it occurred to me that if this character is going to such lengths to mask his identity, that he's wrapping up so much of his face and his glasses cover so much of his face skin, is that actually a bit of his nose that we're seeing, or is that sort of part of the glasses? And so one, I sort of wondered, oh, is that really his nose? Or is he wearing like more of a disguise? Two, I thought, oh, I know we're not going to get an answer, but during the podcast, I wanted to ask Shannon. Shannon, do you know who Alcabra is?
No. And as far as the nose thing, the references that I was sent for the character, because I hadn't drawn the character before, to me it kind of looked like the same setup as the Invisible Man used to wear. And I don't know if you remember like the old Claude Rain films, but he had these goggles and it had a nose piece on it, like attached to it. And so I just drew it that way. So in my version, it's supposed to be like this 3-piece goggle unit kind of thing that he's wearing. I don't know if the original design, it was supposed to be his nose or not, but that's how I drew it. I mean, that was the approach that I took, is that it was actually this kind of like housing that goes over your nose if you're wearing these like welding goggle type things.
Okay, and if you don't have any insight, into the rest of the arc and stuff, that probably gives us a bit of room for you to be able to speculate. Did you have any thoughts on on the mysterious identity of this Cobra?
I originally thought it was, I can't remember his name, but was it Destro's arms dealing cousin or brother? Or...
Darklon.
Yes.
Ooh.
But that was my first.
Interesting. That's a good bit of speculation because we've not seen him for a long time, and this guy here has got his hands on a warhead and is dealing arms out there in Asia. Connections to Cobra. It's not outside the realms of possibility, isn't it?
If the story shifts in chapters 4 and 5 to Darklonia, then I think we'll have a hint. But maybe that's just a red herring. If it even happens, who knows? I gotta wait 3 weeks. I really like the ending of this issue. I like the audacity of the Joes in this yellow van, which is, I don't know, maybe it's a rental car, or maybe they like hooked up with some local American security forces. Like, do you have an armored van we can borrow for this mission undercover? Or it's probably just a rental, right? But
they do joke that it's a rental there. I'm just flicking back to try and find the bit of dialogue because it is a funny moment. And it was actually my quote of the week.
Quote of the week, 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 quote of the week.
So Roadblock has just shot through the side of the van. Chuckles turns to him, thumbs up, nice move, Roadblock. And Roadblock says, "It's a good thing your name was on the van rental agreement."
Thank you for the fact check. I like the audacity of the Joes ramming the Thunder Machine, right? Which just has armor plating on the side with their yellow rental van. And then we get an evocative sound effect for it, right? Pathoom. But you can also see it's a little bit covered up by that word balloon, and I think that's okay. The van is taking great damage for slamming into the Thunder Machine. And then also, 3 great poses from the non-Dreadnoks getting tossed or jumping from the Thunder Machine. But this bit of sort of physical choreography as the yellow van goes up this gangplank. So it's now on the container ship chasing the Thunder Machine. It slams into it, and then the gangplank falls into the bay or the ocean. I guess it's a bay, harbor, and maybe sort of in the heightened reality, the ship is also like cast off. It is now 2 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet further into the water, and then this standoff, right, where there are four Joes on one side with their arms, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Dreadnoks and friends with their arms on the left side, and Black Hat doesn't have a gun and is not aiming a gun back at the bad guys. On this second to last page, top panel, is just inspecting the damage of the Thunder Machine, right? And then this bit, which I think when I read it, I was surprised by how quickly it happens. It happens just in sort of the bottom half of one page and then in the top half of the next page, where it's like, oh, there was a nuke. It's disarmed. What are we going to do? We're going to work. Good guys and bad guys are going to put aside our differences and work together. We're going to dump it in the ocean. But no, it actually works out because, back on the first page, the Joes with their drone, right? Black Hat, we should be able to grab solid documentation when Cobra contacts them about their Sting weapons deal, right? I just hope Cobra buys their cover story. So I love this ending because it turns out that the stakes were really high in the issue. I was just so sort of pleasantly distracted by all the other moving parts of the story, like characters we haven't seen, good chase scene, and then this final panel, right, which is so funny, where the Joes don't want a nuke out there, and neither do the Dreadnoks, and neither does this third party, and so they have a tech person on them, right? Black Hat disarms it, then they can dump it because it's inert, and then this final panel, they're all having cocktails on this container ship in what's the city, Sea Thang, right? It's a Bangkok harbor, And Zorana's putting the last thing you see in the issue. Zorana's putting the umbrella from her mixed drink in Roadblock's ear as if they're about to clink glasses. And I've talked about this on previous episodes. I love it when there's a good reason for the good guys and the bad guys to have to work together. And the Dreadnoks have always had sort of shifting loyalties, and certainly some Joes in the middle of a mission or at the end of a mission might be willing, when not back at the pit and talking to Duke and Hawk, to share a beverage with the bad guys who aren't always bad because they've just done this incredible thing for world peace. This ending is really funny, but it also, and I mean this as a compliment, it feels really 80s. It reminds me of like movies or ends of episodes where someone cracks a joke and everyone chuckles. Not the guy. I mean, everyone laughs.
Oh yeah.
And then like even here's a Hama-ism. Even in the second to last panel, a character refers to Yokosuka Naval Base in Japan, right? Which is like not something that I'm aware of. Not something that I rushed to Google after reading this issue, but just a little bit. It's like all these very specific weapons in the issue that it's like that's what these characters might be using, and you'd better draw this specific weapon, right? It's like, well, where would this group of people go? Like, where would this character want to get dropped off? Like, this isn't like I'll just invent another country, or I'll like invent like, oh, well, I know some friends who are in another ship, they're passing by, I'll just hop on their boat. It's like, no, a real world place. This naval base, it gets mentioned, and these characters are going to get dropped off. So I love the idea that there's a little bit more to this story that continues after the final panel that does not get picked up in the next issue, right? We just know that it's like, well, they enjoyed their drinks and then they watch the sunset and then they go their separate ways. That's awesome.
Or issue 284 opens with a panel of Roadblock and Zorana smoking a cigarette. Shannon, talk us through this last panel.
What?
I
mean, what was
in the script, and what and how close was what you drew to that? So how much of this is Larry Hama and how much of this is you?
It's pretty much everything that Larry put into it. I think I can't remember if he had Zorana putting the umbrella behind his ear or not, but whether it was in there or not, it seemed like it was a natural thing for her to kind of be toying with them. I always get especially because remember that in the cartoon she had like the whole relationship with a Joe in one episode or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it just seemed like, as Tim was saying, that there's this amoebic kind of morality that they have. Sometimes they'll do something good, sometimes it's bad, whatever it is that benefits them. So it just seems natural for her character. I did want to point out, how Tim was talking about with the gangplank kind of thing, kind of falling off the ship. Mm-hmm. I guess it doesn't come out in the dialogue, or I guess it's my fault for not indicating it better. But yeah, in the script, Larry is saying the ship pulls away from, the dock because they're trying to evade, the other cops showing up because they're chasing the Joe van at one point. Like they're supposed to be behind them or something.
Yeah.
But they were supposedly pulling away from the dock so that they could make their escape, and the Joes, crash onto the ship and are coming along for the ride, whether they want them there or not. So yeah, that's why there's supposed to be that bigger space, and that's why the gangplank falls off. But Larry,
to be fair, it does say just in the preceding page, it says my crew has the diesels up and running. We can cast off immediately. So it does make sense that they're kind of able to get going quickly.
But it was one of those things, how we were talking about Larry so specific. That was one of the few times Larry didn't indicate how that whole setup was going to work. And I literally had no idea how logistically that gangplank thing would work. I mean, I tried to do some research. It's not exactly something that you can find with a, Google, gangplank to a cargo ship from the 40s, and you can drive a van on it. It doesn't come up. Nothing like that comes up. So hopefully it reads believable, but I had no idea what I was doing.
Cool. Are we ready to move on to I Spy and just look at point out some little nuggets that we might have spotted?
Yes.
Go for it.
I spy with my little eye.
Okay, so I Spy trigger discipline. So just in that final standoff sequence, we've got We've got Chuckles, Zorana, and Sarawak Sally, all with their pistols pointed at one another. But interesting to note that they are maintaining their trigger discipline. Their trigger finger is outside the guard, so there's little danger that they'll be shooting each other by accident.
And Zandar on the previous page at the bottom.
Ah, yes. But yeah, a small detail, but one that I can imagine that Larry might have pointed out.
Larry was always very specific about you don't have your finger on the trigger unless you intend to shoot. And since they're in the middle of negotiations and you're trying to convince the other person you're trying to negotiate, it's a show of faith, or, so that was my logic on it.
I spy designer sunglasses on the taxi driver in the opening scene where Multo and Lady J are in the back seat. So on page 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, page 4, panel 3, we're looking past the taxi driver. So he's just, some of his head is cropped in the front, and we see his eye looking back at these two Joes. And there's a little insignia on the side of his sunglasses. Shannon, is that something particular?
I think there were Armani glasses that I based it on. When Larry sent out the script, he also sent out references, and apparently, like, one of the trends in Thailand is the gangs there are dressed like Filipino gangs or Chicano gangs. The Filipino gangs dressed like Chicano gangs from the States, like from California. I'm sorry, not Filipino, Thai gangs. And so Larry sent all these references of these guys that are dressed up like that, and very much wanted that, that to be a detail. And so one of the things I noticed is these guys always kind of want to flash their bling. They have like the huge expensive watches, jewelry, necklaces. And so I figured, okay, if this guy's part of that gang, he's not going to wear plastic sunglasses from the 7-Eleven. He's going to go out and buy branded stuff. So it's to feed into the character, helps establish that character set.
And similarly, I spy on page 9, one of Al Cobra's gang members who gets shot by Multo has a Dodgers t-shirt. LA Dodgers.
Yeah. And again, that's part of that whole, it always seems like everybody's always wearing stuff from the States, even though they hate us so much. So it was, throw some of that in there.
Mark, do you have any more I Spy?
I don't have any more. I was going to ask Shannon if there was anything that we've not spotted that he's tucked away in there.
No, I mean, most of this, like, this stuff that I'll do is really more for me. Was it Zandar or whatever? His headscarf that he's got wrapped. So sometimes I'll try, like when I'm looking at the model sheets, from the 80s things, from the cartoons that they put out. I can't remember the name of it, but it's those 2-volume sets that they have, where it's all the model sheets.
Field manual?
Field manual. So I'll look at the model sheets and I'll be like, oh, I don't really like the way that looks. Maybe I can alter it to look a little more reality-based, or like something someone would be wearing now. But I had just finished watching the live-action Way of the House Husband TV show from Japan, and one of the characters wears a big headscarf, but it's like he has this massive amount of hair, so it kind of like rises up way above his head, and it becomes his signature element, like it's almost above it, just above his eyes, and to where it's almost acting like a brim on a hat or something. And so I was like, that's a cool look. I'm going to steal that. So it's little stuff like that I put in more for me than anything. Or the scene where they're climbing out of the thunder machine after it's been hit by the van. You'll see Sally is tugging on her skirt. That's so she can get into that pose. There was a Japanese TV show that I was watching from the 80s, like one of the metal horror shows, and there's a lady cop, and her signature thing became, like, before she'd, go into her stance to shoot people, she'd tug on her skirt so that she could spread her legs and be more stable. And she started doing it, like, every show, like it was her thing. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to throw that in there. And it's stuff that I think is amusing, it makes me giggle, and no one else in the world is going to catch. It's just, maybe there's, like, one other tokusatsu fan out there that's going to catch the reference, but yeah, a lot of this stuff is just me.
I spy 2 more things. One, Zandar is holding the weapon that his action figure came with. So not only an appearance by a character we haven't seen in a long time, but he could easily be sort of carrying many other weapons, but it is that thing that his toy came with. And then I spy on the second to last and third to last and fourth to last pages, and also the page where we first see the nuke. This is something that Shannon does, which I appreciate. An element in the extreme foreground that compositionally breaks up the panel. So the fourth, third, and second to last pages, it's some kind of like bar or rigging or like window pane.
Yeah, it's like one of the masts on the cargo ship.
On that second to last page, it very nicely cuts the panel in half, so you have this added visual separation between the bad guys on one side and the good guys on the other side. But it also is just one more tool in the toolkit of the storyboard artist or the comic book artist to create visual depth. So foreground, middle ground, background, or extreme foreground, middle ground, background. And since we're seeing Chuckles here, this reminds me of, I forget what issue it was, 209 maybe? There's a cover that Shannon drew with Chuckles with a pistol drawn, and there's like a ceiling lamp hanging from the top of the cover that is, I think, mostly in silhouette, and it's this foreground element, right? The scene in the pit cafeteria around that time when the Joes see that there's this hostage situation.
That's 193 is the cafeteria, and that was 191 was the Chuckles cover for those people wanting to look it up.
Thank you. This is a thing that Shannon does in G.I. Joe comics. That's a very small thing that I appreciate, and I think you have to have some confidence in your drawing to cover up 8% of your panel with a thing, with like a black vertical thing, when you could just as easily leave it out and maybe the image is a little prettier, like, oh, the art's going to sell, or there's just one less obstruction. But film directors will put the camera like on one side of a window or through a keyhole or etc. So for creating visual interest, I like it.
Cool. We done I Spy. Normally we would then have error detected, but my list is blank.
I got a tiny one.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
This is color. Page 4.
I won't kill you then.
Yeah, chuck that guy under the bus. That's all right.
I'll put away the map of where I hide bodies.
Page 4, top panel. Chuckles is looking back. Roadblock is sticking out the window, and Black Hat is sort of come up from the back of the van. I think it's Chuckles' left hand on the steering wheel, but it's colored as if those are red fingernails. So I think Jay Brown, for a panel, thought that Black Hat was helping to steer the car.
I don't know. But she's not.
Subtle.
Not my drawing. But sometimes you get in a hurry. It's kind of like when you're doing hand lettering, you forget how to spell your own name.
Yeah, no prize. Chuckles is kind of one of those guys,
Yeah, he might have.
Guitarist who, might might paint one of his hands of nail varnish just to fruit things up a little bit while he's stationed overseas away from loved ones.
He is in Thailand. It could have been one of the bars,
It could have been.
I mean, he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt, right? Like, he's always ready to stick out in a crowd, so.
Stop. Have a
Time to beat the soles of your boots with my face. Sucking chest wounds, red ninjas, brain scanners, rubber oozes, blue ninjas. And then some more sucking chest wounds. Hammer time.
So this is the segment where we look at some hammerisms of things in his dialogue or a story that are favourites for reuse. So I had a couple. There was the calling Multo and Jay in their disguise. They called themselves the anarcho-sycophants or anarcho-syndicalist front. So yeah, Larry always has fun with the names of the different sorts of terrorist cells that someone might potentially belong to. So another fun one there. We had comms being jammed as well, which happened last issue, which is why it stuck out to me. But a useful narrative device to separate the two teams, one of whom may know something that the others don't. Anything from you guys?
Mardus.
Yeah, we got Mardus. Check. It's a roadblock appearance. We're gonna have to call out.
But he doesn't call it that. Chuckles does.
Yeah, a good way of calling attention to the fact that roadblock has got it to hand for when it needs to be whipped out in a hurry later on.
Because nothing says easy and portable and whipped out like a Mardus.
I mean, when
we all
you're
have
roadblock, by comparison, it is easy and portable.
And yeah, we don't see the scene of Roadblock arriving at his destination here in Southeast Asia, where he presumably got this Mardus across the border in a diplomatic pouch as well. So
I don't know if this is I don't think this is a Hama-ism yet. I think this might be sort of a more recent thing. But remember the 2 issues where the Joes go to Comic-Con in San Diego? So
Shannon drew that one.
Yeah. So this bit here where Cobra's gotten away and they're all in the van. They've all piled into the van, and Multo says, "I thought a lot of hackers were multilingual." And Black Hat says, "Much to my parents' chagrin, I don't even speak Hindi, but my Klingon is passable." And I feel like this didn't happen in the 80s Marvel series, but has happened a little bit in the IDW series, and I'm just thinking vaguely of those 2 issues at Comic-Con. I think because like nerd culture has so caught up with and become pop culture, right? Like Comic-Con is just on the cover of Entertainment Weekly magazine, and like everyone's just talking about like seasons of shows. Back, when I was a kid, no one talked about like seasons of shows. It's like, oh, are the new episodes on? It's like, no, it's in season 6, it's in season 7. Oh, well, it dropped during season 5. I feel like and all the Marvel movies and etc. I feel like having a reference to a Joe knowing some Klingon, it's not a Hama-ism, but I feel like it could be. If the series runs for another 100 issues, I feel like we might learn 1 or 2 more things about other characters who make this kind of reference.
Was there anything that you noted that was a particular Larry Hama signifier that you wanted to call out here, Shannon?
No, I mean, because when I'm doing the scripts or drawing the book, I don't get a lot of the dialogue. So a lot of what he his Hama-isms, if you want, as you're calling it that, usually all I notice is whatever gun is this week, or whatever oddball piece of military equipment. Because he'll pick really obscure stuff. Like the machine gun that has the round magazine on top. I think I found 1 extra picture than the one he sent, and it's kind of like, okay, this is not a common thing. I mean, so it just makes my life, more difficult. But that would be my Hama-ism, is the fact that he picks the most obscure rifle that you can possibly find and then expects me to draw it from 40 different angles.
I got one more actually, or sort of a reverse one. Bottom panel of page 16, they're chasing the Thunder Machine, and Roadblock is up on the roof of the yellow rental van, and he says, "I'm trying to blow their tires. Good thing that twin Gatling isn't on a turret mount." So I don't think this is poking fun of the toy design. I think this is, the Hama-ism would be when the Joes are like, we have to get up the hill. Like, oh, there's a gun or a howitzer or something up on the hill or the wall that its turret can't aim down at us. It's like we can go under its angle of fire. So this sort of this acknowledgement of the limitations of how a projectile weapon can actually aim or point.
Very good.
There used to be a pudding that was over-egged. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. At first it was British, but then it was Commonwealth. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. But now there's a new player in town, a comic book writer of of some renown. He's using real-world examples and peppering the issues with lots of samples. It's a Larry Hammer colloquialism. He's talking G.I. Joe and all its heroism. Can you guess what it is? Is it something new? Now listen as Larry drops a slice of real life on you.
Colloquialisms, so little bits of jargon or dialogue or whatnot that might not be so recognizable. I spotted farangs, which makes sense in the context, but Tim, do you know what this one means?
No, I was waiting for you to look it up and tell us.
So this is Thai for foreigners. So once you're out in Thailand, I think it's one of those bits of lingo that you'll see referenced quite frequently. Farangs, foreigners. Joage, this is where we'll say our overall thoughts, score, and obviously with Shannon here, we're on the spot a little bit. But I think when I'm enjoying something, I'm not afraid to be out and proud about it. So so I really enjoyed this issue. There was very little to poke holes in or find fault with. It's up there with the very best of the IDW run, and this overall arc is shaping up to be a favorite that not just among ourselves, but seeing it on the various message boards and comments, even on our own Facebook group, lots of enjoyment of it. So yeah, I think I'd go probably 8. I don't know that there's an awful lot to add. It's a great looking book, fun story, good to see some reappearances of some old characters. Yeah,
I've said this before. I wish the IDW series were not printed on glossy paper, and I wish the color approach were more old-fashioned. And for those reasons, it may be difficult for an IDW G.I. Joe issue to get a 9 or a 10. So this gets a very, very enthusiastic 8. It also, as we said at the beginning of the show, I like all the covers, but not even one of them connects with the issue. In terms of the guts, the pace of this is just motors. It juggles a lot of characters, some characters that we haven't seen, characters we haven't seen in a while, and shows us a place that we haven't seen but is also familiar. It has a fun, not quite twist ending, but a small surprise in sort of that they deal with, how they deal with the weapon, and then these final 2 panels. Great action, great choreography, great poses, facial acting, body acting, and both a chapter of a larger arc and also a very satisfying issue all unto itself, right? I think about, in rating an issue of G.I. Joe, like, how would I feel giving this issue to someone to read who's either never read G.I. Joe or never read comics? And I think a lot of people wouldn't be interested necessarily in reading the 283rd issue of a comic. Although if it was a 5-issue series, they probably also wouldn't want to read issue 3. But this works both as a part of a larger story, a part of the larger sort of Forever Joe story, and also just an excellent, it's kind of just an issue of special missions, particularly since they're not dealing with sort of the mainline Cobra villains, and they're not in costume except for Chuckles. And I love me some special missions. So a very enthusiastic 8.
Very good. Shannon, you're welcome to give it a score.
As Butch would say, it's crap.
Oh dear, own worst critic. Next up, we have got Innuendo.
Attention. At this moment, you are now listening to
Talking Innuendo.
If you are offended by words like
sucking, flesh wound, willy, Pete, balls, crystal balls, hypno shield,
whatever, take the tape out now. This is not a pop album. And by the way, suck my
grandmother's brick in a Prada handbag.
So if you're in the right frame of mind, and specifically my frame of mind, or possibly Shannon's frame of mind, a lot of G.I. Joe names can sound pretty dirty. So the aim of this segment is to just read out a set of 5 regular G.I. Joe names, maybe with a slight intonation to make them sound funnier, and see if I can make my co-host and guest titter. That's right, I said titter. So here we go. Get the idea. I'm going to read out some names, and you have to try and not laugh, but also I'm very happy if you do. So here we go. Bottom line. Burnout. Red Spot. Breaker. Covergirl's Wolverine. And that's the 5.
That last one was close. Who or what is Red Spot?
Yeah.
Red Spot is one of the later editions, sort of around about that G.I. Joe versus Cobra, possibly Venom versus Valet era. 2003, 4-ish, that kind of. There we go. I've been defeated.
Shannon, this is where I say to the guest who draws great G.I. Joe comics and who isn't necessarily on the schedule to draw more G.I. Joe comics, I hope you come back to this office at IDW and draw some more G.I. Joe comics. I know drawing comics is hard. Drawing this book is its own particular set of significant challenges, and this is not like the top selling book, and fans are pretty persnickety. So it's it may not be as rewarding as it was in a different era or could be in a different set of circumstances, but you draw some wonderful G.I. Joe comics, and your own critique aside, I think you are, and when you come back to do more, I hope will be an important part of the G.I. Joe storytelling pantheon.
I appreciate that, dude. It's up to the fans. If they bug Tom will give them what they need, I guess. So, yeah, just bug Tom. Send him irate emails. Tell him you hate Andrew as much as I do.
There we go. That's launched the avalanche. Brilliant. And so you the door's still, from your perspective, the door is still open, and it's not barred shut with various bits of wood and chairs and thunder machines and nuclear warheads blocking the way from you ever drawing G.I. Joe again.
Oh no, it's fun. Who doesn't enjoy drawing just bang up stuff?
Excellent. Yeah. Well. Fingers crossed. I would love to see you return to the book. It's always we're always in for a treat from an art perspective, if nothing else. I mean the book, it's it seems to have hit a good pace in terms of doing something different, establishing new characters, different themes, and sort of treading new grounds, sort of beyond that kind of Dawn, blue ninja and other ninja kind of element that I think that we probably felt we would seen a little bit enough of. I think we were satiated in terms of the amount of blue ninjas that we had. So I think everyone is enjoying this a fresh kind of stream of material that is being mined in these last few issues. Is there anything else that we should be looking out for from you, Shannon? And also, where can people find out more about you and see your stuff?
I literally just finished yesterday pencils for it's either going to be 2 issues or 1 single extra long issue of Godzilla versus Mothra, and it's set in 1984. So there was a lot of research on my end into Japan 1984 and what people were wearing and what the military was using and what people were driving. And I've always been a big Godzilla fan, so that was a lot of fun for me. Other than that, unless you're in the UK or Australia, you can find me in Beano, which has kind of become a regular thing for me. classic kids comic in the UK.
And what strip are you?
They bounce me around, but
is
right
it
now
everything or?
yeah, they bounce me around, but right now they've introduced a new set of characters called the ARAHs, which is a family that owns a joke shop. And so I'm doing the strips that go with the ARAH family. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And then if you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram or Twitter, or my Facebook page is public, but it's all SL Gallant. So you can easily find me just by typing that in and track me down. And I try to post stuff like once a day, or at least a couple of times a week. A lot of it's Beano, and then right now there's a lot of Godzilla stuff on it. So
is there?
That's about it.
You did some Pink Panther stuff for American Mythology, that small publisher. That wrapped up. Is there any of that more in your future?
With American Myth, I'll probably keep tossing covers and stuff because I'm friends with the guy that runs the company. But the Pink Panther stuff, that was a lot of fun for me. But no, I don't. There aren't any plans of me doing anything for Pink Panther right now.
I was going to say, just in terms of the more of the cartooning in Pink Panther and the Beano work, does versus working on something like G.I. Joe, does that feel like it's the same thing, or does it feel like it's almost two entirely different things and approaches in terms of how you come up with the work?
I try to approach the cartoon stuff with more of like a comic book eye, if that makes sense. Like, I've always hated the fact that comic strips are so flat. That's what I love about Bill Watterson's work on Calvin and Hobbes, was it felt like a comic book but with comic strip characters. And so Beano's that same way. Like when I'm drawing Beano, I'm trying to add like odd camera angles and things like that. So there's a lot of crossover. As far as the style change, before I really got back into comics, I was an on-staff illustrator. So at an ad agency, and you had to draw whatever they asked you to draw. So I'd go from doing storyboards of, I've said this before in other interviews, of old people walking in the park talking about their colorectal exam, to drawing Kool-Aid Man, who is also a cartoon character. So it goes all over the place. So changing up styles isn't anything I worry about. But I do try to have some crossover as far as like aesthetic qualities, or just the design aspects of things. So it doesn't feel flat.
Do you have plans for a first convention appearance back now that states are reopening and people are getting vaccinated?
Right now I'm hemming and hawing on whether or not I'm going to try and go to Baltimore Con, which is in October. One, because that's local for me because I'm in Washington, D.C. My plan before everything happened was to try and get over to the UK to do like Thought Bubble or something like that, because I have a lot of friends in the UK, but also because I've been doing so much Beano stuff, just to kind of like, get in front of the fans on that side of the Atlantic. But right now that's kind of a pipe dream because everything's still kind of, playing out and waiting for the pieces to fall into place as far as where you can travel, where you can't. But yeah, the first one, if it happens, will probably be Baltimore.
Okay, yeah. If you do ever make it over to the UK, would be great to see you. And Thought Bubble is a great show.
Mark has been known to go to Thought Bubble and to hand money to artists so they will draw for him. And then
him specifically.
Mark has specifically done that, and then he talks about it on the internet later, that he met an artist and he was drawing, and let's talk about it.
Nice, that works.
Yeah, and actually, I went to dinner with the DC Thompson crew the last Thought Bubble because I was assisting Ian Kennedy, who does a lot of the covers for Commando magazine.
Oh, okay. So, were anybody from the Beano in there, or was it just the Commando guys?
I think there was some crossover. Certainly one of the guys some of the guys have worked on both publications. One of them described the fact that he'd done so much work on the Beano that he used to dream in black and red stripes.
It'll have that effect. It seems like all the characters are in that. Yeah.
So yeah, I think what remains for us to say is thank you very much, Shannon, for making the time for us and talking through. And this issue and spending the time today, but also the years of good service that you have put in for us G.I. Joe comics fans.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, so next time on Talking Joe podcast, on the Disavowed show, we will be talking about the Devil's Due versus Transformers series from around about 2003. Back here on this regular show, we'll be covering the latest issue as it comes out. G.I. Joe ARAH 284 is due 14th of July, so that may happen on that date. And then we'll discuss it shortly afterwards. You can find about us in all of the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that has links to all of those places, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and contact details, as well as a link to our Patreon. A big thanks to backers Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, and Justin, who are getting early access to episodes, as well as some exclusive content. And Tim, where can people find out more about you?
ARealAmericanBook.com.
That's concise.
Sometimes I do the short one.
So, with all that said and done, you can catch us down the road.
Because we've been Talking Joe.
And we're all out of Joes.
You can insert this later, Mark, since you forgot again. This is where you ask me where people can find me on the internet.
Oh, snap.